Good afternoon, all. I hope this finds you and your loved ones safe and healthy during these interesting and challenging times. My name is Patty Simonton, and I'm the director of the Be Green Business Program here at Bethesda Green. Thank you for taking the time today to join us for the first session of our 5-part summer speaker series, Tackling Environmental Challenges Through Sustainable Entrepreneurship. I'll begin by providing just a quick overview of our work here. Through our Be Green Business Program, we work to cultivate innovative eco-entrepreneurs and nurture the development of green businesses to ensure compatibility between economic development and environmental protection. To this end, as part of our B Corp program, we advise existing local businesses through B Corp certification and help them discover and implement best practices for sound governance, support for workers, and sustainability. Through our Innovation Lab, we are constantly on the lookout for leaders who are building for-profit business models around innovative and sustainable solutions to tackle environmental and social challenges. Since Bethesda Green relaunched its entrepreneurial programming in January 2018, we have supported 18 companies, ranging from idea stage to those raising seed and Series A investment rounds. At this time, we are actively recruiting for our Spring 2021 Accelerator cohort, as well as our Amplifier program. Entrepreneurs who are interested in joining the Bethesda Green community are invited to contact me directly to learn more. I'll add my email to the chat. Today, I am pleased to welcome a fantastic group of individuals who will discuss some of the ways the COVID-19 crisis highlighted the weak links in the US food system and what we can do about that. Heather Bruskin is the Executive Director of the Montgomery County Food Council. She spent the first decade of her career in higher education administration and student service as the director of the Freshman Alumni Summer Internship Program at MIT, a financial aid counselor at Georgetown University and the University of Virginia School of Medicine, and a pre-med and pre-law advisor at the University of Virginia. Prior to her work with the Food Council, Heather also served as president of a number of local volunteer-driven community-based organizations here in Montgomery County. Heather holds a BA from Tufts University, a Master's of Education from the University of Virginia. She serves as the FEMA Emergency Food and Shelter Program Board, CKC Farming Advisory Board, and the nonprofit Montgomery Advocacy Committee. And she's an active volunteer in her community, serving as a Girl Scout troop leader, coach for Girls on the Run, vice chair of her local elementary school education foundation board, MCC PTA delegate, and active PTA parent. Heather will be moderating today's discussion. We're so happy to have her. Kim Bryden is the CEO and founder of Cureate, where she applies a holistic systems-level approach while building an empowered food and beverage supply to meet changing consumer demand. She's an accomplished strategic business development professional with expertise in marketing, merchandising, and operations, with a focus on the food and beverage industry. Kim has consulted more than 250 small businesses on growth strategy, building out diversified revenue streams, and identifying new market opportunities. In addition to her commitment to small business growth at large, Kim's expertise has led her to develop multi-sector public-private partnerships with governmental agencies, top Fortune 500 retailers, and food tech startups. Kim is a World Economic Forum Global Shaper, a member of the Sandbox Network and Future Leaders, and sits on the advisory committee of Fair Farms, Maryland. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Karl Jr. is the founder and principal of KAVO Consulting, LLC, which he launched this January. He is a dynamic change agent with a demonstrated history of working in the higher education industry and establishing partnerships with corporate and federal organizations. He directs projects in the areas of strategic brand management, workforce development, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, fundraising, and special projects. Additionally, Karl is the external director for the Farm Credit Foundation for Agricultural Advancement. He provides strategic leadership, higher education insight, and diversity and inclusion input on the Farm Credit Foundation board. Karl also develops strategies for implementing philanthropic initiatives for a multi-million-dollar budget. Thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. We'll keep the discussion going until about 4 p.m., at which point we'll open it up to questions from the audience. I invite attendees to submit their questions during the session here in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Heather, I invite you to take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Patty. I truly appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today and participate in this important conversation. And I'm honored to be alongside Kim and Karl in this discussion today. So as Patty shared, our food system has faced one of its biggest challenges in history when the pandemic exploded in March. We had some of our county's key food access sites closed, our restaurants and schools, and those that stayed open, like our grocery stores and farmers markets, had to pivot their models significantly, including altering their hours, making quick transitions to online purchase platforms. Finding access to PPE was difficult, and other critical resources that were in short supply to keep both their customers and their staff safe, and also pivoting to delivery and curbside models. And some of these strategies exacerbated existing food access barriers for reasons that online SNAP access was really difficult for a lot of residents. So as businesses reopen, they're navigating uncertainties and regulations and then the safety of their staff and their customers. And our food producers have faced really unique challenges. They have had accounts that have been closed, their market pathways have closed, production facilities are no longer accessible or less accessible, and there are uncertainties around labor. And yet the economic crisis is having an even greater and longer term impact on our community. Unemployment in our county has more than tripled, and almost 1 in 10 of our residents is unemployed. Food access has increased by more than 50%. It's estimated to actually be at about 62% over pre-COVID levels, with over 100,000 Montgomery County residents experiencing food access challenges and food insecurity. And yet we've also seen remarkable adaptation and collaboration that's enabled many of our businesses to survive, retain jobs, and support local residents. During this discussion, we'll explore how some of these tremendous challenges have been overcome and identify numerous others that remain to be addressed. And so for the Food Council's perspective, we over the past 4 months have been supporting food and beverage businesses, in particular our MoCo made producers, which are over 70 farms and packaged food and beverage businesses. They're experiencing challenges that are both unique to their sector and many that are shared by most small businesses in our county and in our region. We've also been coordinating the county's food security response, co-leading the task force, pulling together over 150 different community partners every week to address that growing food access challenge, and also connecting across sectors, recognizing that residents who are experiencing food insecurity are also experiencing many other challenges as well. And we've been identifying ways to support local businesses while improving access to nutritious, culturally appropriate food for local residents. We try to facilitate connectivity within the local food system to promote our local economy and address root causes of food insecurity. The more jobs that we have, the fewer people will need access to these food assistance resources. We've facilitated community partnerships and have been overwhelmed by the ingenuity of local entrepreneurs to leverage the resources that they have to protect their employees and neighbors. And we've seen the sharing of trucks, of food, of staff, of storage capacity, and the generosity of our neighbors and local businesses has been incredibly inspiring. And so in short, I think we found the pandemic has created an environment where local food is prioritized more than ever before. And our community is recognizing how critical a resilient local food system is. And so I'm excited to be a part of this discussion today to identify ways that we can hopefully leverage local entrepreneurs in particular to address some of those challenges. And so I think I'll turn it over at this point to Karl to share some of his perspectives and insight.
Thank you very much, Heather. First, I want to say thank you to everybody who signed in this afternoon and attended our talk. I look forward to a vibrant discussion. Many of the things that I've been focusing on since I transitioned really into entrepreneurship, coming from a background really at the corporate level of agriculture and the food sector, I started seeing some things that desperately needed to change, aside from the diversity, equity, and inclusion situation, but also identifying some of the gaps of really supply chain. I think that's one of Kim's specialties, as we're going to hear. But what I'm focusing on right now is really change management issues within organizations who operate within the food and ag space. One of the things that we've seen is nothing operates in a vacuum, right? So anytime there's additional pressures like a pandemic or what we're experiencing now with the increased racial tensions, all of those things have a multiplier effect on already distressed communities. So right now we're working on partnering with organizations who operate in that space to help them kind of craft a path forward and achieve the maximum impact, particularly in communities that they have historically haven't reached. And then secondarily, actually haven't announced it yet, but you heard it here first, going to be rolling out a nonprofit partner as well, focused on increasing the number of Black-owned acreage around the country. So one of the things I did notice working with farmers was, a lot of them are unsure of who's going to inherit the farm, how's that transition going to happen, estate planning, but also the farm apprenticeships kind of dwindled in some of your major farming operations. I know it's had a resurgence here, I would say in Maryland, but trying to get top talent into production has been something that, production and land ownership is something that I've really been personally passionate about, and going to be working on that here in the next month or so, launching that. So really, to sum it up, working on change management with larger organizations who need some agile leadership on tackling some of these issues, but then also focusing on increasing the number of farm acres that are owned by African Americans.
Wonderful, thanks so much. There's so much that I'm looking forward to discussing. Kim, did you want to jump in at this point?
Yes, thanks for having me, everyone. Karl, I'm so eager to talk with you today, and you too, Heather. This is so exciting. So I'm Kim Bryden. I'm the CEO of Cureate, and we exist to shift dollars back into our local communities by building an empowered food and beverage supply to meet this changing consumer demand. What a world we are living in. And you may be asking yourselves, how does this happen? We do this in 3 ways. The first is our courses vertical. So we produce entrepreneurship educational curriculum. And oftentimes I say you may make jam, but not know how to run a jam business. You come to us. So that's part of that building this empowered supply side. We've had the pleasure of working with Heather before and other economic development departments throughout this region. The next is this changing consumer demand, right? What is this demand side of the equation? Who's buying what and where? And so we have a procurement arm where we embed as the local purchasing team at larger institutions like hospitals and corporate cafeterias and convention centers to understand their inventory and see how we can shift some of the things they're purchasing back into small local businesses. So it works together, right? Building the supply to meet that demand. And then the third way in which we do this is consulting. And so we'll work with, again, it could be city government agencies or corner store owners when they're trying to think and reimagine what this reimagine this retail experience and economic landscape and how the food system is shifting. So all of this is, I hope we'll dive into a bit more, but understanding from that macro level how things are shifting from a buying experience and also an economic development lens, and how that influences both the supply and demand side of the equation. So I'm eager to chat more about it.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I think that was very inspiring thoughts to get us started. And perhaps maybe we should start in our conversation focusing on the pre-COVID and what things looked like before the pandemic. And I would love to hear from both of you on what you've identified as some of the existing issues in our food system that were then exacerbated by the pandemic and led to a lot of the supply chain disruptions that we saw and are still experiencing.
Ooh, I have a potential jumping off point on this. So the way the food supply chain is set up pre-COVID is that there are 2 different verticals. You either optimize your sales for grocery retail or it's optimized for food service. universities, sports arenas, etc., hotels, restaurants. And so when the food service side started decreasing because we're not convening in the ways that we typically convene anymore, and then we had this shift into this higher demand for grocery, so much happened in that cacophony of like madness, because most people decide or optimize for one of those channels. And so what I think is so beautiful about small businesses is that they're easier to adapt to potential changes quicker than a lot of larger, not as agile multinational businesses. And so some of the things that we've been saying since 2014 when I started this all is, hey, to build a resilient supply chain, you should probably be investing your money into small local businesses because they're the ones that are going to be there for you when stuff hits the fan. And it started happening. And so I think this is a really interesting time to see how we were going with the cog in the machine because it seemed so efficient and so productive. And like, what are the ways in which that was being held together with these like loose strings? And where's a way for us to now double down, not just in bad times, but in good times of putting our money where our mouth is. So I just wanted to put those two supply chains, back to back for our discussion.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Kim. I think, efficiency is great when everything works the way it's supposed to work. But as soon, I work with quite a lot of poultry companies, and a perfect example, to Kim's point, when folks weren't buying the bulk size needed to go to, say, a school or a convention center, all of a sudden, there's only the chicken has to be a certain size to go to a certain kind of avenue for distribution. So there are certain parts of the chicken that they all of a sudden were like, well, nobody's buying these parts of the chicken, but we can't convert our machines quick enough to chop them up in a different way. And so a lot of companies either had to kill millions of birds or get rid of millions of eggs. And to me, that's indicative of sometimes you can get a little too specialized. And when you're not relying on maybe a regional food system, one kink in the cog can throw the whole system off. And to me, that also is indicative of some of the work that I've been doing, is making sure that folks understand how important it is to be involved in the food system, no matter what part of it you're particularly interested in. So I've been spending the last decade of educating students and early career professionals on opportunities there are in the food system, whether you do want to go work for a company or kind of create your own thing. But you often find that so many people just take the food system for granted, like the food it's just going to be there, right? We don't really think about all the different pieces that have to fall into place for us to kind of get whatever we want, whenever we want, pre-COVID. And now we're seeing how vulnerable that food system is. So I think when I approach it from the standpoint of education and offering folks an opportunity to have some entrepreneurial investment opportunities, but to really make a difference in your local community. As I kind of exited higher education, I was starting to see a lot of students not quite interested to maybe moving to Moline, Illinois to work for a giant agribusiness company, but were more passionate about trying to figure out what can I create, what can I do to add value in my local community. So that's really where I saw a lot of mindset shifts about overall engagement in the food system. And I think we have to continue to encourage folks to get involved. You don't have to be a plant and soil science major to add value to the food system, or you don't have to be an animal science person to get involved in food, animal production. So that's just one of the things that I'm truly trying to focus on is education and engagement and outreach, and then creating ecosystems for people to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there when challenges like this arise.
Thank you both so much for those thoughts. I know that there's been so much on every person's mind as we navigate these constantly changing circumstances of life. And I have really noticed that so often people were coming to me and saying, why can't I find chicken thighs in the grocery store? Why can't I suddenly get the ketchup that I want to get? And looking to the people that work in food for the answers to those questions, and for the first time really asking those questions that had always been there. So need to understand how it got there as long as it was there. And so there has been, I think, some quick learning for a lot of residents on how things work and how small blips can really shift our day-to-day lives and the food that we have access to, those of us who are, have the fortune to shop where we want and how we want. And I think it also really underscored some of the challenges that so many of us were very quickly able to shop online. And just go to get a Whole Foods delivery or go to one of the other grocers that could bring the food to my door and shop safely. And yet residents who are using SNAP to access benefits and access groceries were not able to shop online until very recently. And just thinking, Kim, about your comment that smaller businesses are much more adaptable and can pivot much more quickly. The 3 retailers that were chosen to roll out online SNAP in Maryland are Walmart, Amazon, and ShopRite, which are 3 very large, difficult potentially to adapt their systems retailers. And so that has been, I think, and yet the smaller producers or the smaller retailers who are interested in participating are having a hard time signing on and being able to be approved retailers. And so I think that has really, we've seen that in the rollout of that new program and the challenges the residents have found. And only ShopRite currently allows people to call and use their SNAP benefits by phone. So I think there's a lot of advocacy work to be done there as well. And that's where community voices are particularly important. Kim and Karl, I'd love to hear from you, kind of building on Kim's observation about the ability to adapt and how some small businesses have done that really effectively. I know in the county's ag space, for example, their Butler's Orchard and a lot of the other pick your own farms were very concerned about what that was going to look like when we were, how do you implement social distancing practices when you have folks and going into the fields together to pick blueberries or strawberries. And so they very quickly kind of changed the way they did things. And by all accounts, provided residents a really meaningful opportunity to still go out and as a family or as a community and get access to green space and do some picking on their own. I would love to hear from both of you on what are some other examples that you've seen of particularly successful adaptations of business models to respond to these quickly changing times.
Go for it, Karl.
Yes, it's funny you mentioned, I actually know Ben Butler pretty well, so I'm glad to hear that they're doing well over there. Yeah, I think particularly what I've seen is a lot of direct-to-consumer social media marketing, and particularly when you're talking about anybody who's in that value-added space, all of us, maybe 2 or 3 of the folks that I'm working with right now, to your point earlier, all of a sudden when you can't get that delicious item that you wanted from the grocery store, for whatever reason, it's not there as frequently as you're used to. A lot of folks who are in that value-added space are now able to directly reach out to consumers. Instagram. I've seen TikTok promos. What's the other one? Snapchat. There's quite a lot of opportunity for you to say, hey, I can ship this whatever to you directly. You don't have to go and get it from the grocery store. And now all of a sudden you're building up this customer base who can, one, get more familiar with who the actual producers are, and that builds that customer loyalty. but also really trying to humanize the folks behind who's making our food. And to me, that's been some of the positives I've seen is folks are able to put a face behind maybe the local cheese person or some really delicious local honey. Some things that you might just pick up from the grocery store aisle because of the, you really can't just go out and get it now. Everybody's kind of hopping on and seeing what can I ship to my house to kind of reduce my exposure. And you know, I've seen honey, cheese, even I got some delicious crab meat shipped to my door this morning. And like, I never would have shipped crab meat to my house, but when you're trying to reduce the number of times you have to go outside unnecessarily, you know, when you realize what can get shipped to you, you all of a sudden start looking for, well, I wonder if there is somebody that does this. And to me, I've seen so many producers really hitting social media very hard right now. And it seems to have allowed them to develop a new relationship with their customer base, kind of cut out the middleman. So we'll see if that's sustainable post-COVID. But I think if we had to find a silver lining, you know, I'm seeing a lot of activity on, you know, if I'm growing it, I can ship it to you. So that's a positive thing that I've seen.
Yeah, I agree in this idea of shopping your values and really leaning into what are the things that, I keep going back to my favorite thing, shifting the dollar, but what are the things you're voting for each day with your dollar as a consumer? And I see that happening more and more on a consumer education side. And then also how that small business can lean into their own set of values and how that's a differentiator in this time. So there's a restaurant in DC that has turned part of their space into a market. And so that was an innovation that's emerged of how restaurants can also be pop-up groceries for their communities. And this particular restaurant decided to have their pantry be solely products from Black, Indigenous, people of color-owned businesses. And that is a part of that particular restaurant and restaurateur's mission. And it's a really beautiful extension of what she believes, and also creating another access to opportunity, sales opportunity for all of those businesses that are on those shelves. And then just another example, there is a local nonprofit in DC called Dreaming Out Loud, and they started a Black Farmers CSA for the next 8 weeks or so. And so every piece of produce that comes in the CSA, you know, is coming from local, regional Black farmers. And so I think that is something I've really, I hope that this is not of the moment and continues forward with the way in which people are purchasing and how we as consumers are more conscious now of our food system. Like you were saying, Karl, like we're becoming, hopefully more educated about how things get to our plates, mouths, etc. And I hope it's not a rollback from that. This idea that suddenly a package is just at my door. Wow. Like how many hands touched that package? What were the labor practices behind getting that to your door? Just one more example, there's a fermented foods company called No. 1 Sons. And so when this started, they created almost a local pantry on their website, and then all other small businesses that may not have had delivery capability, they listed their products on their site alongside their fermented goods like kimchis, kombuchas, etc. And so you could order, again, all of their fermented goods plus bread and hummus and a CSA box. So all of those cross collaborations with other like-minded businesses who share that same set of values that you have, I've just really loved seeing those strategic partnerships emerge.
Thank you both. I have seen some really valuable resources to help consumers, as you said, shop with their values and support businesses that they have meaningful connections to. And I know, for example, DC Green's put out a pretty comprehensive list of all the Black and brown owned food businesses in the community. And I would love to know what resources you might point consumers, either those on the call or those that they might share with their networks, where they can learn more about the businesses that are producing food in the area. I know that sometimes the farmers market relationships are shifting as well. We heard from a farmer who regularly enjoys his conversations with his customers as they shop, and now that's a very different dynamic where it's a quick transaction because we have to move on to the next person in line. And so the usual pathways that we have to learn about the vendors and the businesses that we would like to support aren't there. So any suggestions on where you have seen businesses highlighted and their stories told effectively that we would want to share?
Well, definitely the few I've mentioned thus far, but I actually, before answering that even further, can I also point out something I see as a challenge in this that could be emerging, which is to become a business that has this brand awareness. Oftentimes that requires a certain team member, i.e. extra labor, or financing that allows for someone to be dedicated in creating this online content or putting yourself out there. And so I wonder, this is just a question I'm posing recently, is what does economic opportunity and like a democratization of a marketplace look like if everyone's forced online and everyone has different budgets and labor capabilities to play that game? And it makes me very concerned, actually, because if you didn't previously invest in whatever ways you were capable of doing so in that community building and brand building, I've seen people have a really hard time pivoting in this moment because they didn't have that loyal base. And again, that could be any size of business. But I think it's even more important that whatever that tribe is that's going to be your repeat customer is really talked to and engaged with, and then build from there. Because if you don't have stable cash flow from your people who love you and will continue to love you, it's going to be really hard for you to continue growing. So yeah, I'm intrigued to hear everyone's thoughts about like the future of what you're saying, like interactions to find businesses, if it's potentially a numbers game. That makes me afraid. And not just about like big business coming in, but also amongst us all in a certain tier and everyone's resources. And then I guess the other places I would look are each one of our made in programs throughout the region, made in Montgomery County, made in Arlington, made in DC, made in Baltimore. I think any space that is, coalescing a network of people is really important to look at. And if you are a larger business and you're trying to figure out how to shift some of your Nabisco Pepsi dollars back into local, you can talk to me. But yeah, I was soapboxing for so long there. Karl.
Yeah, I think Kim brought up quite a lot of prescient points. I think in order to not repeat what some of the great things she's already talked about, I think, man, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, some of the lasting changes, I think, to Kim's point, I would encourage you all to look up a gentleman named Heber Brown. He runs the Black Church Food Security Network. And an amazing kind of paradigm shift of, instead of you go here for certain things, you go here for certain things, really trying to integrate the food system into the community. So he's built an entire network of Black churches, which are really the predominant landowners in the Black community. And instead of you have to go out and searching for different things to find your food, he's kind of woven this into the community system. So there's a network of churches from like Maryland now all the way down to, I think, South Carolina, where he's training Black churches on how to produce food on the land that they already own. So trying to, one, reduce the distance somebody might have to travel to get fresh produce or fresh food, but also to integrate that kind of into your daily life. So you're not only thinking about where your food comes from when there's a pandemic or when you get hungry, it just becomes a regular part of maybe your weekly, I go to this community event and we're also doing things on the farm. I think when I traveled abroad, that was one of the biggest things that I noticed, the way people see their food system versus how we see it. Ours is so kind of separate, and it's just this giant thing that does this thing. We don't have to think about it. But particularly like in a lot of EU countries, that's just part of, you understand how important it is. Folks are growing their own produce, even if they have a little balcony, everybody's growing food. And to me, I think trying to get back to reintegrating that into some of the daily activities that we do is going to be critical. To Kim's point, getting back to, what's regular.
What I've noticed, and I think has been recognized regionally, is that the work that Baltimore has done, particularly following the uprising and the work that they've been doing building their food system and the resilience in the past few years, has really enabled them to respond really quickly and really effectively in the pandemic. And so the work that's been happening related to food access in Baltimore has been really a good and a meaningful model to all of us in the region as we look to support our own communities. And I think that's growing straight out of Reverend Brown's leadership. And so I really appreciate your sharing that. I also, thinking about what Kim was saying about how will businesses connect with customers during this, time when it's very difficult for people to be together. And we also have been hearing anecdotally that there's been a tremendous amount of interest in starting food businesses at this time. And so Kim, I don't know if you've seen this in outreach for support for new clients, but as people are finding themselves unemployed, underemployed, and they're turning to food as a potential pathway for economic opportunity. And so there's been an increased demand on access to kitchen time and other things in the county. And so not only is it businesses that existed before COVID that are now looking to grow or connect with customers, it's ones that are starting. And so I don't know if that's something, Kim, that you have noticed as well, or if, Karl, you've seen more interest in agriculture as well, but I'd love to hear your observations on that.
Ooh, definitely. And I mean, especially in times of uncertainty when people want to feel agency and ownership of their lives and to have purpose. I mean, that's why I've always loved food. It's like your heart on a plate, or, the thing you're eating. And I think people connect with that so deeply. And if any entrepreneur is tuning in right now, I would just really be mindful in asking yourself, like, business is about solving problems and having someone pay you for the solution to their problem. And so in this idea of wanting to start a food business, really ask yourself, like, what is the problem I'm solving? And not just, my friend said that my cheesecake's delicious and therefore I'm going to sell this cheesecake. That is not going to be an economically viable option for you in a long-term way. So I hope that there are so many problems to solve too, right? Like, this isn't a zero-sum game. There are so many problems. And, I'm saying that actually in a very hopeful way, like lots of challenges. Think about how people are really craving safety and trust in their food system. They're craving community, is something you were just bringing up, Heather, shared experiences in a way, something I've seen quite a few restaurants do and some product-based businesses, is figure out how virtual events factor into their diversified revenue streams, wine classes, cocktail making, etc. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had, but I would not enter into this business if you haven't thought through what is the problem you're actually solving, because that will be a really hard challenge for you in the future. Yeah, definitely consider that.
Well, I don't know, Kim. I think cheesecake is an actual challenge for me sometimes. But
you know what? I'm going to put this out there. The two things I get asked about so often are jam. Like I gave you my example earlier, like if you make jam and don't know how to run a jam business, come to us. I always use jam as an example, and we are lacking a lot of jam makers. So want some jams. And also anything that's a savory snack or like healthy chip alternative. Those two things I get asked about all the time. Random.
Karl, thoughts from the ag and farming side?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned. I remember when I first told all my friends I was going to school to study agriculture, and they all laughed at me. They were like, "Oh, you're going to school to be a farmer? I don't understand." And we don't. Ag's not really a career that gets glamorized a lot. Like, I always say you don't grow up watching Law and Order Special Soybean Unit on television, and think that like that's just something you just don't bump into an ag economist in the grocery store all the time. So, but now all of a sudden people are like, whoa, I can't get something I'm always used to getting. They're like, hey, didn't you study ag? Why is this happening? And then they assume you know everything about the entire food system. So I think, I've certainly seen an awakening in interest in definitely when problems happen, people are like, it's always been easy to get this. Why is it no longer easy to get this? So definitely seeing a major increase in colleges of ag and new enrollment of people going into ag programs. And I think maybe not necessarily with the intention of, I'm going to go run a production operation, but, I have this vision and I need the skill set that I want to solve it. I bumped into somebody from the World Food Prize Foundation. He was one of the laureates. And if you don't know about them, they're kind of like the Nobel Peace Prize for agriculture. And he said, we always ask young people, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And, we never ask them, what problem would you like to solve in the world? And I said, that changes the conversation a lot. And when you start talking about solving problems, you inevitably come back to, food, fiber, and environment usually. So, I'm seeing a lot of talent coming into the ag space that wants to solve big problems. They want to know, why does this neighborhood have a Whole Foods and this neighborhood doesn't? Or why has that farm that I drive past all the time, why has it been vacant for 30 years? Or why is this giant plot of land smell like this? Or what, all these kind of questions that people just kind of didn't really focus in on, or now people are trying to come in like, well, how do I fix that problem? How do I make sure that this maybe necessary kind of agricultural production, how do I reduce the environmental impact on that? It's like, trying to balance feeding people with also protecting kind of the future. Something that's been very inspiring to me is I see people starting to splinter off into, this company's not moving fast enough for me, I'm gonna go do my own thing. People are looking at food as a way to solve major problems. I think that is something that's uplifting in this time of turmoil. So I think it's the land grant system has to do a much better job of addressing some of the societal problems that we have. Awesome, beautiful job at research, amazing job at extension for the most part. But I think, taking Baltimore, for example, I always kind of called out my own institution at the time. It was like, we're not doing enough work in a city where we're recruiting hundreds of students from. ag doesn't stop at the farm. So I think that's where we're seeing this revitalization of people trying to get into agriculture to tackle societal issues. And that's exciting for me to see.
Could I actually just go on this problems train just a little bit further? Which is, I also hope that what emerges from this is the way in which we do procurement. Possibly this is teeing up another major point to come between us all, but the way in which we handle procurement is it is very prescriptive. Like, I have already deemed this is the solution, and now I need someone to fill the exact thing that I have decided the solution is. And I would hope that we could move towards values-based or problems-based procurement. So at the beginning of this whole thing, imagine if the RFP, the request for proposal, read something like, we are looking to put together 20,000 grocery boxes for our residents. It needs to include X amount of protein, fiber, produce, etc. You tell us how you're going to meet that need, but that's the problem. Instead, what an RFP could read like in reality right now is, we need 20,000 grocery boxes that have X amount of Dole fruit cups, X amount of Goya beans, X amount. So then every single person who is in the food system trying to make these grocery boxes has to go out and buy the same exact product because it's more prescriptive, as opposed to, again, stating what the problem is actually. So I just made those examples up off the top of my head right now, but you can see how that could cause a lot of turmoil in getting the right supply, when really, and it's locking out the small local business that could possibly meet that demand much faster. So yeah, procurement, world.
And getting to the question that somebody had put in the chat box about what do we think might be the long-term impacts of some of the response work that's happening. And I just wanted to build on what you shared about procurement, Kim, because that's something that that the Food Council has been working on for a long time here in the county, of how can we get our local institutions, our local government to invest more of its dollars in products from local farms and other small businesses. And it is challenging to move institutions quickly and to shift the way they make their purchases, both for logistical and contract reasons, and also just because it was always ultimately a values decision of it cost more to purchase from these businesses. And we have had opportunities through the pandemic response to make small shifts that, while they're funded in the short term through CARES Act programs, CARES Act funding, it establishes a precedent that I hope will enable us to revisit that year after year in the future and show that it is possible. We have mechanisms and relationships in place now to do that. A couple examples are, we have a farm to food bank program that existed with food assistance providers. Before, it was a program of Manna Food Centers, but the challenge was always that the budget didn't allow for fair pricing for the farms. And so it was better than the farms giving it away, but it wasn't really actually keeping their business model sustainable. And so now we have a program where we've worked with the farms and the Office of Agriculture and Manna Food Center to establish fair prices for a certain set of products. And this also includes culturally appropriate products. And we haven't had a chance to talk about that much today, but that is such a critical component to food access, is access to food that is that you're familiar with, that matches your cultural traditions and the pathways of our diverse populations in the county. But we can then the county will purchase those products from the farms at fair prices and then distribute them to residents through our food assistance network. And there's also been regionally examples of that through MAFRAC, which is the Mid-Atlantic Food Resiliency Access Coalition. I might have gotten that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's what it is. And it's an opportunity to leverage local dollars from philanthropy and other investors to purchase products from farms and other food businesses at market value, and then again distribute it to residents who are experiencing food insecurity. And so it's just a few examples of how we can hopefully take those pathways and then keep them moving forward in future years, when hopefully we may find ourselves out of a pandemic at some point. Let's all imagine that day. Karl, I also want to get back to your comments about land ownership and land access, because I know that we have talked about lack of access to a commercial kitchen as a barrier for folks who maybe want to be making jam. Let's hope there's those people out there for Kim. But access to land to be able to farm is incredibly hard to come by, especially in Montgomery County, where most of our farms that are producing food, it's actually on land that's leased and not land that they own. And so thinking about into the future, are there strategies that you've seen that have been successful at making land access a little bit more feasible for local residents who are looking to get into farming? Or are there also some policy changes that you might see that would make this in the future a more feasible option for people interested in exploring that path?
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack there, Heather. I think I definitely have seen maybe on the smaller end of things, a need to look at, we all hear the statistic about the average age of farmers being dangerously old. When you're talking about that, the wherewithal and the knowledge and the lack of knowledge transfer that will happen if kind of generation moves on, we don't have that next generation of producers. And I think there's various policies, land preservation programs. Some counties do a much better job of that than others, but I think there's still a critical need for estate planning, and then also kind of transfer of that institutional knowledge of running a farming operation. But I think some of the spaces I've been operating in a little bit more is redefining what a farm is. And particularly when you're talking about urban spaces, obviously they're not going to be able to have, several hundred acres of land in the middle of a city, but you could reconstitute, empty warehouses and shipping containers. I've seen all kinds of spaces, and I think some of our agencies need to open up a little bit more about what does a farm look like. And then you even start moving into alternative proteins. Believe it or not, there's lots of cricket farms now. There's folks raising a lot of insects. I think there's an alligator farm somewhere north of Baltimore. I mean, is that considered livestock? So there's all these kinds of new opportunities that are going to cause some of our regulatory agencies to reimagine what a farm is. I think land ownership is absolutely critical, but the reality of having access and the capital to even get it just might not be feasible for a lot of people. But getting access to space that's being underutilized is. So I'm really excited about some of the new ag tech prospects, the alternative protein prospects. There's a movement now to reconstitute old poultry houses into mushroom farms because the environmental conditions are ideal to grow mushrooms in an old poultry house. So there's a lot of things that are kind of on the horizon. But I think, to Heather, your point, some of our institutions have to shift their focus on what the definition of a farm is. And even back to, I think you were mentioning, some of the incentives aren't there. We have to incentivize people to want to go into production and incentivize producers to want to take advantage of these programs. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, I want to feed people, but I also have to feed my family too. So it has to be a profitable enterprise. So we have to also reprioritize some of the incentives for folks to, one, go into it, stay into it, and then take advantage of some of these programs that distribute food more directly to the community.
Thank you. And there's a question in the chat box to just confirm that you said alligator farm north of Baltimore.
I absolutely said alligator farm.
Well, I think you need to add a 6th webinar, Patty. Exploring alligator farming. So I know we're coming close to our time for turning it over to the attendees today for some questions for Q&A, but I did want to close and have Karl and Kim both offer if your response to the question, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing in our local food system, what would that be?
Ooh, I'm feeling very inspired by this incentivization discussion that was just emerging. So many times the reasons why money doesn't move in the ways in which we would hope it to is based on rebates and kickbacks, and I want us to really consider what value means. And when we're saying we want the lowest bid possible, like what is the price of food that, and what are you saying you are committing to by always going for the lowest bid possible? And the only way in which we can start effectuating that change, it's not even that a small business or even small local farmer is egregiously not price competitive. There are just all of these systems set up. Well, Karl, you could talk about commodities market, I'm sure, much better than I can, but there are all these systems set up that allow for this disconnect to occur. And so I would love for us to look at what are these different incentives of why people are continuing to operate in the systems that they are. And just as a quick tangent to this, but related, for example, any sort of institutional food service that has a hot bar, no way, we're not going to have hot bars at all for a very long time. And so, okay, hot bars were really big money makers. They had really high margins and made a lot of money for these places. So now if you have to think about everything being packaged, what an interesting opportunity it is for a small local business who was a restaurant to reconsider their offerings into some sort of packaged meal, and what could that look like inside of an institutional setting. And that's something that we do with one of our buyer partners currently, George Washington University Hospital. And so it is happening, we're doing it, but it takes somebody to really, like we're talking about, reimagine the system and really think outside of the box. So hopefully all of you watching this can be advocates in your own communities and places of employment to move this needle a bit more.
Excellent, thanks, Kim. Karl, if you waved your wand.
If I had my magic wand, I think, you know, I would wish to have, or create the opportunity, the economic opportunity for all people to eat for nutrition instead of calories. And I think that's where you see a lot of our health problems springing up, particularly in distressed communities. The economic reality of, well, this is going to fill me up, but it might not be providing me the nutrition that I need. So when you have to make these real life economic decisions on what food you buy, what food you may go out of your way to get instead of something else. You know, a lot of our healthcare problems are stemming from folks eating for caloric intake instead of the nutritional value of food. And the reality is, if you're worrying about keeping the lights on, sometimes you don't have time to worry about the organic produce. So for me, I would have a magic wand that would create some equity in, at bare minimum, people should have food. And that's just, you know, one of the things that I'm going to continue to strive to impact. But you know, I've just seen so many kind of, and particularly even working at the college level, right, where it might be very critical for you to get those nutrients in to pass that midterm. But if you're a broke college student, you're eating salty noodles because the incentives just aren't there right now to maybe eat local, buy local, and then particularly when we're talking about eating for nutrition instead of calories. So that would be my magic wish.
Thank you both for that. And Patty didn't put a limit on how powerful my wand got to be. So I think just building on what Karl just shared, I think what I truly see as one of the deepest frustrations that we experience on a day-to-day basis in the food security space is that so much energy and thought and care, rightfully so, but is put into creating these really complicated food assistance distribution systems. And if we could use any momentum or resources that we have to redistribute wealth and create economic opportunities and preserve jobs so that we didn't have to have 100,000 of our county's residents accessing food through these food assistance networks, but rather in ways that allow them to purchase what they want, when they want, how they want it, I think is what I wrestle with really, really regularly. And that's a whole, it's a whole different conversation, but I think it's really important and meaningful to revisit some of our core assumptions and root causes of a lot of the work that we're doing to really make sure that our core goal is fighting structural racism and building equity in our food system, because I think ultimately that's what we can do with a lot of these resources, and so how that's my hope for even some change following some of our pandemic response. So. Patty, I think at this point, I'm supposed to hand it over to you.
That's great. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Karl. For everyone, I invite you to either ask questions for our panelists in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, I invite you to do that, and we can certainly field a couple of questions here. We do have a few minutes on that. There are, I'm not sure if, and Heather, you did address it, and I'm not sure, I can't recall if all of you had a chance to kind of look at it, but, you know, back to Theo's question in terms of the lasting changes to the food industry coming out of this, you know, changes around, you know, Karl, you referenced this really early on, and how the factories are designed in terms of, you know, are they too specialized? Like, are systems going to completely revamp to be able to accommodate and adjust on the fly? Are labeling regulations changing in terms of what gets permitted to be distributed to what area, right? Like if milk is, you know, being sold in the gallons, but it's, you know, it's supposed to be designed for kids in school, like how does that happen? And are systems responding in the way that they need to? You know, one would hope that we don't face another pandemic like this again in the near future, or that, you know, at least we can get out of this sometime soon, fingers crossed. But, you know, what are we looking at in terms of broader system, the actual like logistics, nuts and bolts of things moving forward? What would you think? And this is open to all of you.
Yeah, that was the weighty question there. I think I'll take this just from my familiarity with the poultry industry. There is they've had this kind of reemergence into the consumer wants the bird to be grown this way. We're going to grow it that way, give them exactly what they want, and find a way to make it profitable. Well, at least the ones that are going to be competitive. But I think I'm not sure if there is a solution yet. I would love to say that there is a you know, folks have learned their lesson, but I think just from the conversations I've had is definitely making sure that they're more prepared for another outbreak. But I don't I've not had a conversation with anybody in leadership saying, we're going to tear this factory down, reimagine how we're going to do this. I think perhaps the realizing how reliant they are on schools being open, conventions taking place, large gatherings to move a lot of their product. I think that's going to be a realization that we're going to have to figure out how to be a lot more agile about. And I think a lot of them just took it for granted that there's always going to be giant convention X every year that they could sell, several tons of chicken to or beef or whatever. I think maybe we might, if we could possibly revisit this conversation 6 months from now, it might be a better answer for you. But right now, the vibe I've been getting is ride this out and see what happens.
Yeah. And I wonder, and Kim, this came up, I believe, in a conversation that you and I had earlier about kind of, what do farmers even plant, come spring? Who are they feeding? What are they planning to do if they're not growing crops to feed that many millions of livestock, or the livestock is being grown in a different area, and the supply, the partnerships that they have, like how will systems adapt to the changes in demand that they can't even predict? I mean, no one can, right? Schools go back maybe, and then they close again, and then they go back, and then they close again. And, that flexibility is so key. And are the systems that you're seeing, and all of you, like, do you have the groups kind of readjusted and sort of found that way forward, at least in the short term, or is everyone still sort of scrambling in your opinion?
Everyone's scrambling.
Yeah.
And I think super high level here, I think our culture of how we talk about startups and silver bullet solutions and a unicorn of a company and dominate the market, it's just all about this a centralization of resources. And I think in this we're understanding that a decentralized network, or how do we understand all of these possibilities and diversification of our revenue streams, because we don't know what's emerging. We cannot know. And sitting with that uncertainty is really hard as any individual, as an entrepreneur. I mean, all of us crave some sort of false sense of control in our lives. And when that's taken away, it's just really hard to sit with. But what, again, why I love small businesses is that we've sort of been of the mindset of how do we adapt and change to cash flow issues and figuring out what our community's needs are, and are closer to the problems than larger businesses, so we can see them in a quicker way. And COVID here, COVID gone, the amount of climate disasters that are going to be emergent, this is not changing. To think that there's any sort of semblance of well, once we get back up and running, maybe, but also the next thing will just happen. So I think the quicker people can at least become comfortable with uncertainty and understanding that it is really beneficial and valuable to have a diversification of how you're approaching different market opportunities, the better.
I appreciate that. We have time for just one more question if anyone would like to pop in. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Last call. You three have just been awesome. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. This has been recorded. We'll go ahead and we'll put this on our Bethesda Green YouTube channel. And I invite you to share it, all of you, for attending as well. I've included some information in the chat, both for how to contact me if you're interested in joining or learning more about the Bethesda Green Innovation Lab. And then I invite you to our future speaker series. We have 4 more sessions on the topics of more of the sustainable food systems, as well as the circular economy, one of which will be targeted on fashion, and the other one a little bit on business models of the circular economy and the policies behind that. So should be lots of great conversations moving forward. I guess we'll call it a wrap. I'm going to stop the recording here.